Chapter 10 of the White Company. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clive Catterall. The White Company by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 10. How Hordle John found a man whom he might follow. If he might not return to Beaulieu within the year, and if his brother's dogs were to be set upon him if he showed his face upon Minstead land, then indeed he was adrift upon earth. North, south, east, and west, he might turn where he would, but all was equally chill and cheerless. The abbot had rolled 10 silver crowns in a lettuce leaf and hid them away in the bottom of his scrip, but that would be a sorry support for 12 long months. In all the darkness there was but the one bright spot of the sturdy comrades who he had left that morning. If he could find them again, all would be well. The afternoon was not very advanced, for all that had befallen him. When a man is afoot at cockcrow, much may be done in the day. If he walked fast, he might yet overtake his friends ere they reached their destination. He pushed on, therefore, now walking and now running. As he journeyed he bit into a crust which remained from his Beaulieu bread, and he washed it down by a draught from a woodland stream. It was no easy or light thing to journey through this great forest, which was some 20 miles from east to west, and a good 16 from Bramshaw Woods in the north to Lymington in the south. Alleyne, however, had the good fortune to fall in with a woodman, axe upon shoulder, trudging along in the very direction that he wished to go. With his guidance he passed the fringe of Boldwood Walk, famous for old ash and yew, through Mark Ash with its giant beech trees, and on through Knightwood Groves, where the giant oak was already a great tree, but only one of many comely brothers. They plodded along together, the woodman and Alleyne, with little talk on either side, for their thoughts were as far asunder as the poles. The peasants' gossip had been of the hunt, of the bracken, of the grey-headed kites that had nested at Wood Fidley, and of the great catch of herring brought back by the boats of Pitt's Deep. The clerk's mind was on his brother, on his future, above all on this strange, fierce, melting, beautiful woman who had broken so suddenly into his life, and as suddenly passed out of it again. So distraught was he, and so random his answers, that the woodman took to whistling, and soon branched off upon the track to Burley, leaving Alleyne upon the main Christchurch road. Down this he pushed as fast he might, hoping at every turn and rise to catch sight of his companions of the morning. From Vinney Ridge to Rhinefield Walk the woods grow thick and dense up to the very edges of the track, but beyond the country opens up into broad dun-coloured moors, flecked with clumps of trees and topping each other in long low curves up to the dark lines of forest in the furthest distance. Clouds of insects danced and buzzed in the golden autumn light, and the air was full of the piping of the songbirds. Long glinting dragonflies shot across the path or hung tremulous with gauzy wings and gleaming bodies. Once a white-necked sea-eagle soared screaming high over the traveller's head, and again a flock of brown bustards popped up from among the bracken and blundered away in their clumsy fashion, half running, half flying, with strident cry and whir of wings. There were folk, too, to be met upon the road, beggars and couriers, chapmen and tinkers, cheery fellows for the most part, with a rough jest and homely greeting for each other and for Alleyne. Near Shotwood he came upon 5 seamen on their way from Poole to Southampton, rude, red-faced men, who shouted at him in a jargon which he could scarce understand, and held out to him a great pot from which they had been drinking, nor would they let him pass until he had dipped pannikin in and taken a mouthful, which set him coughing and choking, with the tears running down his cheeks. Further on he met a sturdy black-bearded man mounted on a brown horse, with a rosary in his right hand and his long 2-handed sword jangling against his stirrup iron. By his black robe and his 8-pointed cross upon his sleeve, Alleyne recognized him as one of the Knights Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem, whose presbytery was at Baddesley. He held up 2 fingers as he passed, with a "Benedict fili mi," whereat Alleyne doffed hat and bent knee, looking with much reverence at one who had devoted his life to the overthrow of the infidel. Poor simple lad, he had not learned yet that what men are and what men profess to be are very wide asunder, and that the Knights of St. John, having come into large part of the riches of the ill fated Templars, were very much too comfortable to think of exchanging their palace for a tent, or the cellars of England for the thirsty deserts of Syria. Yet ignorance may be more precious than wisdom, for Alleyne, as he walked on, braced himself to a higher life by the thought of this other's sacrifice, and strengthened himself by his example, which he could scarce have done had he known that the Hospitaller's mind ran more upon Malmsey than on Mamelukes, and on venison rather than victories. As he pressed on, the plain turned to woods once more in the region of Wilverley Walk, and a cloud swept up from the south, with the sun shining through the chinks of it. A few great drops came pattering loudly down, and then in a moment the steady swish of a brisk shower, with the dripping and dropping of the leaves. Alleyne, glancing round for shelter, saw a thick and lofty holly bush so hollowed out beneath that no house could have been drier. Under this canopy of green 2 men were already squatted, who waved their hands to Alleyne that he should join them. As he approached he saw that they had 5 dried herrings laid out in front of them, with a great hunch of wheaten bread and a leathern flask full of milk. But instead of setting to at their food, they appeared to have forgot all about it, and were disputing together with flushed faces and angry gestures. It was easy to see by their dress and manner that they were 2 of those wandering students who formed about this time so enormous a multitude in every country in Europe. The one was long and thin, with melancholy features, while the other was fat and sleek, with a loud voice and the air of a man who was not to be gainsaid. "Come hither, good youth," he cried. "Come hither. Vultus ingenui puer. Heed not the face of my good coz here. Foenum habet in cornu, as Don Horace has it, but I warrant him harmless for all that." "Stint your bull's bellowing," exclaimed the other. "If it come to Horace, I have a line in my mind: loquaces sapiat. How doth it run? The English of it being that a man of sense should ever avoid a great talker. That being so, if all were men of sense, then thou wouldst be a lonesome man, coz." "Alas, Deacon, I fear that your logic is as bad as your philosophy or your divinity, and God wot it would be hard to say a worse word than that for it. For, hark ye, granting propter argumentum that I am a talker, then the true reasoning runs that since all men of sense should avoid me, and thou hast not avoided me, but art at the present moment eating herrings with me under a holly bush, ergo you are no man of sense, which is exactly what I have been dinning into your long ears since ever I first clapped eyes on your sunken chops." "Tut, tut!" cried the other. "Your tongue goes like the clapper of a mill wheel. Sit down here, friend, and partake of this herring. Understand first, however, there are certain conditions attached to it." "I had hoped," said Alleyne, falling into the humor of the twain, "that a trencher of bread and a draught of milk might be attached to it." "Hark to him, hark to him!" cried the little fat man. "It is even thus, Deacon. Wit, lad, is a catching thing, like the itch or the sweating sickness. I exude it around me. It is an aura. I tell you, coz, that no man can come within 17 feet of me without catching a spark. Look at your own case. A duller man never stepped, and yet within the week you have said 3 things which might pass, and 1 thing, the day we left Fordingbridge, which I should not have been ashamed of myself." "Enough, rattle pate, enough," said the other. "The milk you shall have, and the bread also, friend, together with the herring, but you must hold the scales between us." "If he hold the herring he hold the scales, my sapient brother," cried the fat man. "But I pray you, good youth, to tell us whether you are a learned clerk, and if so, whether you have studied at Oxenford or at Paris." "I have some small stock of learning," Alleyne answered, picking at his herring, "but I have been at neither of these places. I was bred amongst the Cistercian monks at Beaulieu Abbey." "Pooh, pooh!" they cried both together. "What sort of an upbringing is that?" "Non cuivis contingit adire Corinthum," quoted Alleyne. "Come, brother Stephen, he hath some tincture of letters," said the melancholy man more hopefully. "He may be the better judge, since he hath no call to side with either of us. Now, attention, friend, and let your ears work as well as your nether jaw. Judex demanter, you know the old saw. Here am I upholding the good fame of the learned Dun Scotus against the foolish quibblings and poor silly reasonings of Willie Ockham." "While I," quoth the other loudly, "do maintain the good sense and extraordinary wisdom of that most learned William against the crack brained fantasies of the muddy Scotchman, who hath hid such little wit as he has under so vast a pile of words that it is like one drop of Gascony in a firkin of ditch water. Solomon his wisdom would not suffice to say what the rogue means." "Certes, Stephen Hapgood his wisdom doth not suffice," cried the other. "It is as though a mole cried out against the morning star because he could not see it. But our dispute, friend, is concerning the nature of that subtle essence which we call thought. For I hold with the learned Scotus that thought is in very truth a thing, even as vapor or fumes, or many other substances which our gross bodily eyes are blind to. For, look you, that which produces a thing must be itself a thing, and if a man's thought may produce a written book, then must thought itself be a material thing, even as the book is. Have I expressed it? Do I make it plain?" "Whereas I hold," shouted the other, "with my revered preceptor, Doctor Praeclarus et Excellentissimus, that all things are but thought. For when thought is gone, I prithee, where are the things then? Here are trees about us, and I see them because I think I see them. But if I have swooned, or sleep, or am in wine, then my thought having gone forth from me, lo, the trees go forth also. How now, coz, have I touched thee upon the raw?" Alleyne sat between them, munching his bread, while the twain disputed across his knees, leaning forward with flushed faces and darting hands, in all the heat of argument. Never had he heard such jargon of scholastic philosophy, such fine drawn distinctions, such cross fire of major and minor, proposition, syllogism, attack and refutation. Question clattered upon answer like sword on a buckler. The ancients, the fathers of the church, the moderns, the scriptures, the Arabians were each sent hurtling against the other, while the rain still dripped and the dark holly leaves glistened with the moisture. At last the fat man seemed to weary of it, for he set to work quietly upon his meal, while his opponent, as proud as the rooster who was left unchallenged upon the midden, crowed away in a last long burst of quotation and deduction. Suddenly, however, his eyes dropped upon his food, and he gave a howl of dismay. "You double thief!" he cried. "You have eaten my herrings, and I without bite or sup since morning." "That," quoth the other complacently, "was my final argument, my crowning effort, or peroratio, as the orators have it. For, coz, since all thoughts are things, you have but to think of a pair of herrings, and then conjure up a bottle of milk wherewith to wash them down." "A brave piece of reasoning," cried the other, "and I know of but one reply to it." On which, leaning forward, he caught his comrade a rousing smack across his rosy cheek. "Nay, take it not amiss," he said. "Since all things are but thoughts, then that also is but a thought, and may be disregarded." This last argument, however, by no means commended itself to the pupil of Ockham, who plucked a great stick from the ground and signified his dissent by smiting the realist over the pate with it. By good fortune the wood was so light and rotten that it went to 1,000 splinters, but Alleyne thought it best to leave the twain to settle the matter at their leisure, the more so as the sun was shining brightly once more. Looking back down the pool strewn road, he saw the two excited philosophers waving their hands and shouting at each other, but their babble soon became a mere drone in the distance, and a turn in the road hid them from his sight. And now, after passing Holmesley Walk and the Wootton Heath, the forest began to shred out into scattered belts of trees, with gleam of cornfield and stretch of pasture land between. Here and there by the wayside stood little knots of wattle and daub huts, with shock-haired labourers lounging by the doors, and red-cheeked children sprawling in the roadway. Back among the groves he could see the high gable ends and thatched roofs of the franklins' houses, on whose fields these men found employment, or more often a thick dark column of smoke marked their position and hinted at the coarse plenty within. By these signs Alleyne knew that he was on the very fringe of the forest, and therefore no great way from Christchurch. The sun was lying low in the west, and shooting its level rays across the long sweep of rich green country, glinting on the white fleeced sheep, and throwing long shadows from the red kine, who waded knee deep in the juicy clover. Right glad was the traveller to see the high tower of Christchurch Priory gleaming in the mellow evening light, and gladder still when, on rounding a corner, he came upon his comrades of the morning, seated astraddle upon a fallen tree. They had a flat space before them, on which they alternately threw little square pieces of bone, and were so intent upon their occupation that they never raised eye as he approached them. He observed in astonishment, as he drew near, that the archer's bow was on John's back, and the archer's sword by John's side, and the steel cap laid upon the tree trunk between them.
"Mortimer fie!" Aylward shouted, looking down at the dice. "Never have I had such cursed luck. A murrain on the bones! I have not thrown a good main since I left Navarre. A 1 and a 3. En avant, camarade." "4 and 3?" cried Hordle John, counting on his great fingers. "That makes 7. Ho, archer, I have thy cap. Now have at thee for thy jerkin." "Mon Dieu!" he growled, "I am like to reach Christchurch in my shirt." Then suddenly glancing up, "Hola! By the splendour of heaven, there is our cher petit. Now, by my 10 finger bones, this is a rare sight to mine eyes." He sprang up and threw his arms round Alleyne's neck, while John, no less pleased, but more backward and Saxon in his habits, stood grinning and bobbing by the wayside, with his newly won steel cap stuck wrong side foremost upon his tangle of red hair. "Hast come to stop?" cried the bowman, patting Alleyne all over in his delight. "Shall not get away from us again." "I wish no better," said he, with a pringling in the eyes at this hearty greeting. "Well said, lad," cried big John. "We three shall to the wars together, and the devil may fly away with the Abbot of Beaulieu. But your feet and hosen are all besmudged. Hast been in the water, or I am more mistaken?"
"I have, in good sooth," Alleyne answered; and then, as they journeyed on their way, he told them the many things that had befallen him: his meeting with the villein, his sight of the king, his coming upon his brother, with all the tale of the black welcome and of the fair damsel. They strode on either side, each with an ear slanting towards him, but ere he had come to the end of his story the bowman had spun round upon his heel and was hastening back the way they had come, breathing loudly through his nose.
"What then?"
asked Alleyne, trotting after him and gripping at his jerkin.
"I am back for Minstead, lad."
"And why, in the name of Saints?"
"To thrust a handful of steel into the sockman. What, hail a damsel against her will, and then loose dogs at his own brother? Let me go."
"Nanny, nanny," cried Alleyne, laughing, "there was no scathe done. Come back, friend." And so, by mingled pushing and entreaties, they got his head round for Christchurch once more. Yet he walked with his chin upon his shoulder until, catching sight of a maiden by the wayside well, the smiles came back to his face and peace to his heart. "But you," said Alleyne, "there have been changes with you also. Why should not the workman carry his tools, wear a bow and sword and cap? And why so warlike, John?"
"It is a game which friend Aylward hath been a teaching of me." "And I found him an over apt pupil," grumbled the bowman. "He hath stripped me as though I had fallen into the hands of the tardvenus. But by my hilt, you must render them back to me, camarade, lest you bring discredit upon my mission, and I will pay you for them at armorers' prices." "Take them back, man, and never heed the pay," said John. "I did but wish to learn the feel of them, since I am like to have such trinkets hung to my own girdle for some years to come." "Ma foi! He was born for a free companion," cried Aylward. "He hath the very trick of speech and turn of thought. I take them back then, and indeed it gives me unease not to feel my yew stave tapping against my leg bone. But see, mes garçons, on this side of the church rises the square and darkling tower of Earl Salisbury's castle, and even from here I seem to see on yonder banner the red roebuck of the Montacutes." "Red upon white," said Alleyne, shading his eyes; "but whether roebuck or no is more than I could vouch. How black is the great tower, and how bright the gleam of arms upon the wall! See below the flag how it twinkles like a star." "Aye, it is the steel headpiece of the watchman," remarked the archer. "But we must on if we are to be there before the drawbridge rises at the vespers bugle, for it is likely that Sir Nigel, being so renowned a soldier, may keep hard discipline within the walls, and let no man enter after sundown."
So saying, he quickened his pace, and the three comrades were soon close to the straggling and broad spread town which centred around the noble church and the frowning castle. It chanced on that very evening that Sir Nigel Loring, having supped before sunset, as was his custom, and having himself seen that Pommers and Cadsand, his two war horses, with the 13 hacks, the 5 jennets, my lady's 3 palfreys, and the great dapple gray roussin, had all their need supplied, had taken his dogs for an evening breather. 60 or 70 of them, large and small, smooth and shaggy, deerhound, boarhound, bloodhound, wolfhound, mastiff, allen, talbot, lurcher, terrier, spaniel, snapping, yelling, and whining, with a score of lolling tongues and waving tails, came surging down the narrow lane which leads from the Twynham kennels to the bank of Avon. 2 russet clad varlets, with loud halloo and cracking whips, walked thigh deep amid the swarm, guiding, controlling, and urging. Behind came Sir Nigel himself, with Lady Loring upon his arm, the pair walking slowly and sedately, as befitted both their age and their condition, while they watched with a smile in their eyes the scrambling crowd in front of them. They paused, however, at the bridge, and, leaning their elbows upon the stonework, they stood looking down at their own faces in the glassy stream, and at the swift flash of speckled trout against the tawny gravel. Sir Nigel was a slight man, of poor stature, with soft lisping voice and gentle ways. So short was he that his wife, who was no very tall woman, had the better of him by the breadth of 3 fingers. His sight having been injured in his early wars by a basketful of lime which had been emptied over him when he led the Earl of Derby's stormers up the breach at Bergerac, he had contracted something of a stoop, with a blinking, peering expression of face. His age was 46, but the constant practice of arms, together with a cleanly life, had preserved his activity and endurance unimpaired, so that from a distance he seemed to have the slight limbs and swift grace of a boy. His face, however, was tanned of a dull yellow tint, with a leathery, poreless look, which spoke of rough outdoor doings, and the little pointed beard which he wore, in deference to the prevailing fashion, was streaked and shot with grey. His features were small, delicate, and regular, with clear cut, curving nose, and eyes which jutted forward from the lids. His dress was simple and yet spruce. A Flandrish hat of beaver, bearing in the band the token of Our Lady of Embrun, was drawn low upon the left side to hide that ear which had been partly shorn from his head by a Flemish man at arms in a camp broil before Tournay. His cote hardie, or tunic, and trunk hosen were of a purple plum color, with long weepers which hung from either sleeve to below his knees. His shoes were of red leather, daintily pointed at the toes, but not yet prolonged to the extravagant lengths which the succeeding reign was to bring into fashion. A gold embroidered belt of knighthood encircled his loins, with his arms, 5 rose gules on a field argent, cunningly worked upon a clasp. So stood Sir Nigel Loring upon the bridge of Avon, and talked lightly with his lady. And, certes, had the 2 visages alone been seen, and the stranger been asked which were the more likely to belong to the bold warrior whose name was loved by the roughest soldiery of Europe, he had assuredly selected the lady's. Her face was large and square and red, with fierce, thick brows, and the eyes of one who was accustomed to rule. Taller and broader than her husband, her flowing gown of sendal and fur lined tippet could not conceal the gaunt and ungraceful outlines of her figure. It was the age of martial women. The deeds of Black Agnes of Dunbar, of Lady Salisbury, and of the Countess of Montfort were still fresh in the public minds. With such examples before them, the wives of the English captains had become as warlike as their mates, and ordered their castles in their absence with the prudence and discipline of veteran seneschals. Right easy were the Montacutes of their castle of Twynham, and little had they to dread from roving galley or French squadron while Lady Mary Loring had the ordering of it. Yet even in that age it was thought that, though a lady might have a soldier's heart, it was scarce as well that she should have a soldier's face. There were men who said that of all the stern passages and daring deeds by which Sir Nigel Loring had proved the true temper of his courage, not the least was his wooing and winning of so forbidding a dame.
"I tell you, my fair lord," she was saying, "that it is no fit training for a damsel. Hawks and hounds, rotes and citoles, singing a French rondel, or reading the Geste de Dune de Mayence, as I found her yesternight, pretending sleep the artful, with the corner of the scroll thrusting forth from under her pillow. Lent her by Father Christopher of the Priory, forsooth, that is ever her answer. How shall all this help her when she has a castle of her own to keep, with 100 mouths all agape for beef and beer?" "True, my sweet bird, true," answered the knight, picking a comfit from his cold dregeoir. "The maid is like the young filly, which kicks heels and plunges for very lust of life. Give her time, dame, give her time." "Well, I know what my father would have given me. Not time, but a good hazel stick across the shoulders. Ma foi, I know not what the world is coming to, when young maids may flout their elders. I wonder that you do not correct her, my fair lord." "Nay, my heart's comfort, I never raised a hand to woman yet, and it would be a passing strange thing if I began on my own flesh and blood. It was a woman's hand which cast this lime into mine eyes, and though I saw her stoop, and might well have stopped her ere she threw, I deemed it unworthy of my knighthood to hinder or balk one of her sex." "The hussy!" cried Lady Loring, clenching her broad right hand. "I would that I had been at the side of her." "And so would I, since you would have been the nearer me my own. But I doubt not that you are right, and that Maud's wings need clipping, which I may leave in your hands when I am gone, for, in sooth, this peaceful life is not for me, and were it not for your gracious kindness and loving care, I could not abide it a week. I hear that there is talk of warlike muster at Bordeaux once more, and by St. Paul, it would be a new thing if the lions of England and the red pile of Chandos were to be seen in the fields, and the roses of Loring were not waving by their side." "Now woe worth me, but I feared it," cried she, with the color all struck from her face. "I have noted your absent mind, your kindling eye, your trying and riveting of old harness. Consider, my sweet lord, that you have already won much honor, and that we have seen but little of each other. That you bear upon your body the scar of over 20 wounds received in I know not how many bloody encounters. Have you not done enough for honor and the public cause? My lady, when our liege lord the king, at 80 years, and my Lord Chandos at 80, are blithe and ready to lay lance in rest for England's cause, it would ill beseem me to prate of service done. It is sooth that I have received 27 wounds. There is the more reason that I should be thankful that I am still long of breath and sound in limb. I have also seen some bickering and scuffling. 6 great land battles I count, with 4 upon sea, and 57 onfalls, skirmishes, and bushments. I have held 22 towns, and I have been at the intaking of 31. Surely it would be bitter shame to me, and also to you, since my fame is yours, that I should now hold back if a man's work is to be done. Beside, bethink you how low is our purse, with bailiff and reeve ever croaking of empty farms and wasting lands. Were it not for this constableship which the Earl of Salisbury hath bestowed upon us,
we could scarce uphold the state which is fitting to our degree. Therefore, my sweeting, there is the more need that I should turn to where there is good pay to be earned and brave ransoms to be won." "Ah, my dear lord," quoth she, with sad, weary eyes, "I thought that at last I had you to mine own self, even though your youth had been spent afar from my side. Yet my voice, as I know well, should speed you on to glory and renown, not hold you back when fame is to be won. Yet what can I say? For all men know that your valor needs the curb and not the spur. It goes to my heart that you should ride forth now, a mere knight bachelor, when there is no noble in the land who hath so good a claim to the square pennon, save only that you have not the money to uphold it." "And whose fault is that, my sweet bird?" said he. "No fault, my fair lord, but a virtue. For how many rich ransoms have you won, and yet have scattered the crowns among page and archer and varlet, until in a week you had not as much as would buy food and forage. It is a most knightly largesse, and yet without money how can men rise?"
"Dirt and dross!" cried he.
"What matter rise or fall, so that duty be done and honor gained? Banneret or bachelor, square pennon or forked, I would not give a denier for the difference, and the less since Sir John Chandos, chosen flower of English chivalry, is himself but a humble knight. But meanwhile fret not thyself, my heart's dove, for it is like that there may be no war waged, and we must wait the news. But there are 3 strangers, and one, as I take it, a soldier fresh from service. It is likely that he may give us some word of what is stirring over the water." Lady Loring, glancing up, saw in the fading light 3 companions walking abreast down the road, all grey with dust and stained with travel, yet chattering merrily between themselves. He in the midst was young and comely, with boyish open face and bright grey eyes which glanced from right to left, as though he found the world around him both new and pleasing. To his right walked a huge red headed man, with broad smile and merry twinkle, whose clothes seemed to be bursting and splitting at the very seam, as though he were some lusty chick who was breaking bravely from his shell. On the other side, with his knotted hand upon the young man's shoulder, came a stout and burly archer, brown and fierce eyed, with sword at belt and long yellow yew stave peeping over his shoulder. Hard face, battered headpiece, dint in brigandine, with faded red lion of St. George ramping on a discoloured ground, all proclaimed as plainly as words that he was indeed from the land of war. He looked keenly at Sir Nigel as he approached, and then, plunging his hand under his breastplate, he stepped up to him with a rough, uncouth bow to the lady.
"Your pardon, fair sir," said he, "but I know you the moment I clapped eyes on you, though in sooth I have seen you oftener in steel than in velvet. I have drawn string beside you at La Roche Derrien, Romorantin, Maupertuis, Nogent, Auray, and other places."
"Then, good archer, I am right glad to welcome you to Twynham Castle, and in the steward's room you will find provant for yourself and comrades. To me also your face is known, though mine eyes play such tricks with me that I can scarce be sure of my own squire. Rest a while, and you shall come to the hall anon and tell us what is passing in France, for I have heard that it is likely that our pennons may flutter to the south of the great Spanish mountains ere another year has passed."
"There was talk of it in Bordeaux," answered the archer, "and I saw myself that the armorers and smiths were as busy as rats in a wheat rick. But I bring you this letter from the valiant Gascon knight, Sir Claude Latour. And to you, lady," he added after a pause, "I bring from him this box of red sugar of Narbonne, with every courteous and knightly greeting which a gallant cavalier may make to a fair and noble dame."
This little speech had cost the blunt bowman much pains and planning, but he might have spared his breath, for the lady was quite as much absorbed as her lord in the letter, which they held between them, a hand on each corner, spelling it out very slowly with drawn brows and muttering lips. As they read it, Alleyne, who stood with Hordle John a few paces back from their comrade, saw the lady catch her breath, while the knight laughed softly to himself. "You see, dear heart," said he, "that they will not leave the old dog in his kennel when the game is afoot. And what of this white company, archer?"
"Ah, sir, you speak of dogs," cried Aylward, "but there are a pack of lusty hounds who are ready for any quarry, if they have but a good huntsman to halloo them on. Sir, we have been in the wars together, and I have seen many a brave following, but never such a set of woodland boys as this. They do but want you at their head, and who will bar the way to them?" "Pardieu!" said Sir Nigel. "If they are all like their messenger, they are indeed men of whom a leader may be proud. Your name, good archer?" "Sam Aylward, sir, of the 100 of Easebourne and the Rape of Chichester."
"And this giant behind you?"
"He is big John of Hordle, a forest man who hath now taken service in the Company."
"A proper figure of a man at arms," said the little knight. "Why, man, you are no chicken, yet I warrant him the stronger man. See to that great stone from the coping which hath fallen upon the bridge. 4 of my lazy varlets strove this day to carry it hence. I would that you two could put them to shame by budging it, though I fear that I overtask you, for it is of a grievous weight." He pointed as he spoke to a huge rough hewn block which lay by the roadside, deep sunken from its own weight in the reddish earth. The archer approached it, rolling back the sleeves of his jerkin, but with no very hopeful countenance, for indeed it was a mighty rock. John, however, put him aside with his left hand, and stooping over the stone, he plucked it single handed from its soft bed and swung it far into the stream. There it fell with a mighty splash, one jagged end peaking out over the surface, while the waters bubbled and foamed with far circling eddy.
"Good lack!" cried Sir Nigel.
"And good lack!" cried his lady, while John stood laughing and wiping the caked dirt from his fingers.
"I have felt his arms round my ribs," said the bowman, "and they crackle yet at the thought of it. This other comrade of mine is a right learned clerk, for all that he is so young. Allen, the son of Edric, brother to the Socman of Minstead."
"Young man," quoth Sir Nigel sternly, "if you are of the same way of thought as your brother, you may not pass under portcullis of mine."
"Nay, fair sirs," cried Allen hastily, "I will be pledge for it that they have no thought in common, for this very day his brother hath set his dogs upon him and driven him from his lands."
"Are you too of the White Company?" asked Sir Nigel. "Hast had small experience of war, if I may judge by your looks and bearing." "I would fain to France with my friends here," Alleyne answered, "but I am a man of peace, a reader, exorcist, acolyte, and clerk." "That need not hinder," quoth Sir Nigel.
"No, fair sir," cried the bowman joyously. "Why, I myself have served 2 terms with Arnold de Serval, he whom they call the archpriest. By my hilt, I have seen him ere now, with monk's gown trussed to his knees, over his sandals in blood, in the forefront of the battle. Yet ere the last string had twanged, he would down on his 4 bones among the stricken, and have them all houseled and shriven, as quick as shelling peas. Ma foi, there were those who wished that he would have less care for their souls and a little more for their bodies."
"It is well to have a learned clerk in every troop," said Sir Nigel. "By St. Paul, there are men so caitiff that they think more of a scrivener's pen than of their lady's smile, and do make their devoir in hopes that they may fill a line in a chronicle or make a tag to a jongleur's romance. I remember well that at the siege of Retters there was a little sleek fat clerk of the name of Chaucer, who was so apt at rondel, servant, or tonson, that no man dare give back a foot from the walls, lest he find it all set down in his rhymes and sung by every underling and varlet in the camp. By my soul's bird, you hear me prate as though all were decided, when I have not yet taken counsel either with you or with my lady mother. Let us to the chamber while these strangers find such fare as pantry and cellar may furnish." "The air strikes chill," said the lady, and turned down the road with her hand upon her lord's arm. The 3 comrades dropped behind and followed. Aylward much the lighter for having accomplished his mission, Alleyne full of wonderment at the humble bearing of so renowned a captain, and John loud with snorts and sneers which spoke his disappointment and contempt.
"What ails the man?"
asked Aylward in surprise. "I have been cozened and bejaped," quoth he gruffly.
"By whom? Sir Samson the Strong?"
"By thee, Sir Balaam the false prophet."
"By my hilt!" cried the archer, "I thought I be not Balaam, yet I would converse with the very creature that spake to him. What is amiss then, and how have I played you false?" "Why, marry, did you not say, and Alleyne here will be my witness, that if I would hie to the wars with you, you would place me under a leader who was second to none in all England for valor? Yet here you bring me to a shred of a man, peaky and ill nourished, with eyes like a moulting owl, who must needs, forsooth, take counsel with his mother ere he buckles sword to girdle."
"Is that where the shoe galls?" cried the bowman, and laughed aloud. "I will ask you what you think of him 3 months hence, if we be all alive, for sure I am that—"
Aylward's words were interrupted by an extraordinary hubbub which broke out that instant some little way down the street in the direction of the priory. There was deep mouthed shouting of men, frightened shrieks of women, howling and barking of curs, and over all a sullen, thunderous rumble, indescribably menacing and terrible. Round the corner of the narrow street there came rushing a brace of whining dogs, their tails tucked under their legs, and after them a white faced burgher, with outstretched hands and wide spread fingers, his hair all a bristle and his eyes glinting back from one shoulder to the other, as though some great terror were at his very heels. "Fly, my lady, fly!" he screeched, and whizzed past them like bolt from bow, while close behind came lumbering a huge black bear, with red tongue lolling from his mouth and a broken chain jangling behind him. To right and left the folk flew for arch and doorway. Hordle John caught up the Lady Loring as though she had been a feather, and sprang with her into an open porch, while Aylward, with a whirl of French oaths, plucked at his quiver and tried to unsling his bow. Alleyne, all unnerved at so strange and unwonted a sight, shrunk up against the wall with his eyes fixed upon the frenzied creature, which came bounding along with ungainly speed, looking the larger in the uncertain light, its huge jaws agape with blood and slaver trickling to the ground. Sir Nigel alone, unconscious to all appearance of the universal panic, walked with unfaltering step up the centre of the road, a silken handkerchief in one hand and his gold comfit box in the other. It sent the blood cold through Alleyne's veins to see that, as they came together, the man and the beast, the creature reared up with eyes ablaze with fear and hate, and whirled its great paws above the knight to smite him to the earth. He, however, blinking with puckered eyes, reached up his kerchief and flicked the beast twice across the snout with it. "Ah, saucy, saucy!" quoth he, with gentle chiding, on which the bear, uncertain and puzzled, dropped its forelegs to the earth again, and, waddling back, was soon swathed in ropes by the bear ward and a crowd of peasants who had been in close pursuit. A scared man was the keeper, for, having chained the brute to a stake while he drank a stoup of ale at the inn, it had been baited by stray curs, until, in wrath and madness, it had plucked loose the chain and smitten or bitten all who came in its path. Most scared of all was he to find that the creature had come nigh to harm the lord and lady of the castle, who had power to place him in the stretch neck or to have the skin scourged from his shoulders. Yet when he came with bowed head and humble entreaty for forgiveness, he was met with a handful of small silver from Sir Nigel, whose dame, however, was less charitably disposed, being much ruffled in her dignity by the manner in which she had been hustled from her lord's side. As they passed through the castle gate, John plucked at Aylward's sleeve. The two fell behind. "I must crave your pardon, comrade," said he bluntly. "I was a fool not to know that a little rooster may be the gamest. I believe that this man is indeed a leader whom we may follow." End of chapter 10.